On December 21st, 2021, three childhood friends embarked on what would become an unforgettable and terrifying journey in the Northern Territory of Australia. The trio, comprising 22-year-old Brett Mann and 19-year-olds Sean Blowers and Ashley McGuff, lived in Darwin, a coastal city that serves as the capital of the Northern Territory. Known for its rugged beauty and wildlife, Darwin is located in what is colloquially called the Top End, a remote and sparsely populated region. While the UK, by comparison, has 70 million inhabitants, the Top End houses only around 300,000 people, with roughly half of them residing in Darwin. Its limited population can be attributed to a lack of resources, poor infrastructure, and the harsh conditions of the land. The area is hot year-round, with wild weather patterns and an environment that feels hostile to human life. The adage that everything in Australia is trying to kill you rings especially true in this unforgiving landscape. However, Brett, Sean and Ashley were accustomed to these challenges, having grown up surrounded by the dangers of the Top End. They often sought ways to stave off boredom in Darwin, which led them to frequent outdoor adventures. On this particular day, they decided to head to a nearby salt flat, about 50 miles southwest of Darwin. The open terrain would be perfect for racing their quad bikes. By 11:40 a.m., they had packed their quad bikes into a trailer, hooked it up to their pickup truck, and set out for a day of fun. As they left Darwin behind, the desolate dirt roads carried them deeper into the wilderness. Their path wound through a landscape dotted with eucalyptus trees, palm groves, and the occasional towering termite mound. After driving for about half an hour, they passed the Tumbling Waters Holiday Park, a resort catering to adventurous families. Beyond that point, civilization vanished. They continued for another 30 minutes as the trees surrounding the road grew denser, creating a jungle-like atmosphere. This change in scenery signaled that they were nearing the Finniss River, a notoriously dark and brackish waterway, though it remained hidden behind the dense foliage. The Finniss River spans 30 miles and runs east to west through the Top End. Its murky waters earned it a reputation for being treacherous, as one could only see an inch or two below the surface, making it impossible to know what lurked beneath. Despite this, the trio pressed on, eventually pulling off the road where the vegetation remained thick. They unloaded their quad bikes and spent hours racing and spraying mud at one another in a muddy version of the salt flats due to recent heavy rains. By 4:30 p.m., they decided to call it a day. As they packed up, one of them suggested they head down to the river to wash off the mud. It was a casual decision that would soon turn fatal. Although locals in the Top End knew better than to swim in natural waterways unless clearly designated for swimming, Brett, Sean, and Ashley felt no concern. They had swum in the Finniss River before without incident, and the thought of danger never crossed their minds. After leaving the truck behind, they ventured into the mangrove forest that lay between the salt flats and the riverbank. Normally, the walk would take about 10 minutes, but they had only been walking for a minute when they found themselves standing in a few inches of water. The river had swollen due to the heavy rains, flooding the mangrove forest. But the trio shrugged it off and pressed forward, feeling confident they could navigate the flooded terrain. As they moved through the thinning mangroves, their pace slowed. The riverbank was notoriously steep, and with the water obscuring the ground, they couldn't see where the drop-off began. They were well aware that if they took a wrong step, they'd plunge into the water, which could be well over their heads. They inched forward cautiously, and just as the trees gave way to open water, one of them slipped. He tumbled down the slope but managed to grab onto a mangrove root, pulling himself back up. The others joined him at the river's edge, where they stood staring at the fast-moving black water. Though the river looked dangerous, they believed they could handle it. They held on to the roots of the mangroves, carefully lowering their bodies into the water, one by one. They washed the mud from their clothes while ensuring they maintained a firm grip on the roots. Just as they were about to finish up and pull themselves back to safety, Brett lost his balance. His grip slipped, and within moments, he was swept into the fast-moving current. Sean and Ashley, their backs turned at the time, heard Brett's frantic yells and quickly realized what had happened. Without hesitation, they jumped into the river to rescue their friend. Though they were all strong swimmers, they immediately felt the overwhelming force of the current. It was much stronger than they had anticipated. Brett, having been in the water longer, had already been pulled far downstream. What began as a mild inconvenience quickly escalated into a desperate situation. Sean and Ashley, now realizing the severity of their predicament, knew they had to get out of the water. But they couldn't leave Brett behind. They decided to swim downstream, hoping to catch up to him before they all found a safe spot to exit the river. They called out to Brett, urging him to hold on as they swam toward him. The current worked both for and against them. It sped their progress, but also made it difficult to control their direction. After a few minutes of hard swimming, they finally reached Brett. The three friends floated together, allowing the river to carry them as they scanned the shoreline for a clump of mangrove trees to grab onto. Without something to hold onto, getting out of the river would be nearly impossible. As they drifted, they realized they were being pulled farther and farther from where they had entered. The steep riverbanks offered little hope of escape, and the water around them was growing darker, colder, and more ominous. Panic began to set in as they realized they had underestimated the danger of the river. The trio had ventured into a situation that had quickly spiraled out of their control. The Finniss River, with its treacherous currents and hidden dangers, had claimed the lives of many unwitting victims over the years. Though Brett, Sean, and Ashley had survived countless adventures in the top end, they now found themselves at the mercy of the river. Their fate remained uncertain as they continued to drift downstream, desperate for a way out, hoping that their strength and resourcefulness would be enough to save them. The trio was growing increasingly uneasy as they floated down the river. The current was far stronger than any of them had anticipated, making it clear that the situation was becoming more dangerous by the second. Still, they convinced themselves they could handle it. They were confident they'd find a place to get out soon, laugh it off later, and make it into a great story. Sean was leading the way, with Ashley right behind him, and Brett following up the rear. They were spaced only an arm's length from one another, silently scanning the riverbanks for a viable landing spot. Minutes passed, and tension began to settle in. Then, all of a sudden, Ashley yelled, his voice sharp with panic. "I saw something. We need to get out, now! Find a tree! Climb! Climb!" Sean didn't need to be told twice. Adrenaline flooded his system, and without thinking, he surged forward, his body moving purely on instinct. He didn't even look back to check on Brett. His only focus was reaching a tree, any tree, and getting out of the water. He spotted one growing right out of the river itself, its trunk poking up through the rushing current. Without hesitation, he swam hard toward it, clambering up the trunk as soon as he was within reach. He scrambled to the first fork, about 6 to 8 feet above the water, and finally paused to catch his breath. Once Sean was safely perched on the branch, he looked back down toward the river. Ashley was close behind, swimming frantically. Sean reached down, grabbing Ashley's arm and hoisting him up onto the branch beside him. Both of them sat there, panting and wide-eyed, the panic still thick in the air around them. But Brett wasn't with them. They looked around, confusion turning quickly into fear. "Where's Brett?" Sean asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Ashley muttered, his eyes scanning the water. "Maybe the current pulled him downstream. Maybe he found another tree." They started shouting for Brett, their voices rising in pitch as the seconds stretched on with no response. The river seemed unnaturally quiet, as if it was swallowing their cries, leaving nothing but the sound of the rushing water. There was no sign of Brett anywhere. Suddenly, Sean saw something, a flash of yellow. His heart skipped a beat. "Wait, do you see that?" he said, nudging Ashley. Ashley followed his gaze, and they both peered down into the murky water. Something yellow was rising to the surface. Slowly, it became clearer, until they could finally make it out. It was Brett. He was floating face down, his yellow jacket unmistakable. But something was terribly wrong. His body wasn't moving. And then they saw it. The reason Brett wasn't swimming. A massive saltwater crocodile had him in its jaws. The crocodile, easily 13 feet long, was holding Brett's lifeless body in its mouth, clamping down on his left side. For a few horrifying seconds, neither Sean nor Ashley could move. They just stared, frozen in shock, as the full weight of what they were witnessing sank in. Their friend was in the jaws of a predator, completely limp, likely already dead. And there was nothing they could do about it. The crocodile didn't move either. It simply floated there, holding Brett's body, its cold, reptilian eyes fixed on the two boys in the tree. It seemed to be staring directly at them, almost as if it was sending a message. This is what happens to anyone who dares to come into my territory. You're next. For what felt like an eternity, though it was only about 2 minutes, Sean and Ashley sat there, locked in a silent, terrified standoff with the creature below. The crocodile's gaze never wavered, and neither did theirs. It was as if the beast was taunting them, showing them exactly what it had done to Brett, and hinting at what it would do to them if they made one wrong move. Then, without warning, the crocodile slipped beneath the surface, vanishing into the dark depths of the river, taking Brett's body with it. The water returned to its eerie stillness, as if nothing had happened. Sean and Ashley were left sitting in the tree, stunned and shaking. They couldn't even process what had just occurred. There wasn't time for grief or for shock to settle in fully. Instead, survival instincts kicked in, pushing all emotions aside. Without saying a word, they began to climb higher up the tree, desperate to get as far away from the water as possible. Sean managed to pull himself up to a branch about 10 or 12 feet above the water, gripping the trunk of the tree as tightly as he could. Ashley followed, climbing to a slightly higher branch, only a few feet above Sean. Both of them clung to the tree, holding on for dear life, their muscles aching from the strain. As they sat there, trying to catch their breath, the reality of their situation slowly began to sink in. Brett was gone. There was no denying that now. But they couldn't focus on that. They had to focus on surviving. "We'll be okay," Ashley said quietly, as if trying to convince himself. "Our families will notice we're missing. They'll send someone to look for us." Sean nodded, though his thoughts were racing in a different direction. Even if their families realized they were gone, how long would it take for someone to find them? Hours? Days? The crocodile was still out there, lurking somewhere beneath the water. And how long could they stay in this tree, clinging to the branches? Eventually, exhaustion would set in. They'd have to sleep. And if they fell asleep and lost their grip, they'd fall into the river. And they both knew what waited for them there. Their words of reassurance started to trail off, the silence between them thick with fear and uncertainty. They clung to the tree, trying not to think about what had just happened, or what might happen next. Then, without warning, Ashley froze. His gaze dropped, locked onto something below them. Sean followed his friend's line of sight and felt his blood turn to ice. The water beneath the tree was rippling. Something was moving down there. It was back. The black water below them seemed endless, murky, and filled with danger. Sean and Ashley sat perched in the branches of a lone tree, their bodies trembling from exhaustion and fear. They had no idea where their friend Brett was, and their only company now was the terrifying presence lurking just beneath the water. A 13-foot saltwater crocodile. The crocodile had returned, and although it no longer had Brett in its jaws, the silence of the river weighed heavy on the two teens. Brett was just gone. The realization hit them hard, but they couldn't afford to dwell on it for long. Saltwater crocodiles are the most aggressive and dangerous of their kind, notorious for hunting humans when given the chance. This one had been circling the tree for hours, its menacing eyes just above the water's surface, waiting, watching. Ashley and Sean were trapped, helpless in the tree, separated from the predator below by nothing but the fragile branches that barely held their weight. Their hearts raced as they clung to the tree, knowing that this massive reptile was waiting for them to make one wrong move. The crocodile circled lazily around the tree, occasionally submerging itself, only to rise again, positioning its eyes to stare straight up at them. The message was clear. It was waiting for its next meal. Desperation hung in the air. The teens prayed that at some point the crocodile would lose interest, give up, and leave. Hours passed, the tension thick between them. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the river, the crocodile finally seemed to grow tired. It drifted under the water and disappeared from sight. For a few minutes there was silence, broken only by the gentle sound of the river lapping against the tree. Sean, who was perched on a lower branch than Ashley, decided he couldn't risk staying so close to the water any longer. He had to climb higher. Taking a deep breath, he carefully stood up on his branch. The bark was slippery, and his legs felt weak from exhaustion, but he reached up with his right hand, grabbing a branch above. It seemed sturdy enough, so he tested it. Confident it would hold, he pulled his weight up, but then the branch snapped. In a flash, Sean plummeted into the dark water below. The cold shock of the river swallowed him whole. Instinctively, he kicked and thrashed, disoriented as he sank a few feet under. His heart pounded as his mind screamed, "The crocodile is going to get me!" He fought to surface, his arms clawing through the water, desperately trying to reach the top. Breaking through the surface, Sean gasped for air, his eyes darted around, panic rising as he realized the current had pulled him away from the tree. Fear surged through him, and without wasting a second, he began swimming with all his strength toward the tree, kicking his legs frantically. He knew every splash, every kick was like a beacon to the predator lurking somewhere beneath him, but there was no other option. There were no other trees, no other place of safety in sight. His only hope was to get back to Ashley and the tree. The river seemed to drag him away, as fast as he could swim, but with sheer determination, Sean finally managed to grab hold of a root extending from the tree. He pulled himself, inch by inch, his lower half still submerged in the water. His heart hammered in his chest as he imagined the crocodile's jaws clamping down on his legs at any second. But, by some miracle, he made it. Grabbing onto the tree trunk, he hoisted his body out of the water and scrambled up to the branch where he'd been before. Ashley, his eyes wide with shock and relief, helped him climb even higher to his own branch. They sat there, side by side, breathless and trembling. Just as they began to calm down, they both glanced downward. In the fading light, they saw it, the crocodile. It was swimming back toward the tree, circling beneath them once again. Sean had escaped just in time. As night fell completely, darkness swallowed the river. The pitch-black sky offered no reprieve, no city lights or distant glow to illuminate their surroundings. The teens could no longer see the crocodile, but they knew it was still there. They could hear it, every now and then, repositioning itself just beneath the water. The two boys clung to each other, gripping the branches with white-knuckled hands. They couldn't see each other anymore. The darkness so absolute that even their own limbs were barely visible. Anytime one of them moved, they announced it in low whispers, a small effort to keep track of each other and make sure neither of them slipped out of the tree and into the deadly water below. Hours passed, each minute stretching into what felt like an eternity. They sat in silence, the only sounds coming from the crocodile's movements below and the rushing of the river. Every now and then, they would flinch at the slightest sound, their nerves frayed by the constant fear of what lay just beyond their sight. Then, just after midnight, a storm rolled in. The first raindrops were small, but soon it became a torrential downpour. The water hit the surface of the river with such force that the sound drowned out everything else, including the movement of the crocodile. Sean and Ashley could no longer hear the predator beneath them. They were left in terrifying uncertainty. Was the crocodile still there, waiting for them? Or had it finally swum away? Every flash of lightning offered a brief, horrifying answer. In those quick bursts of light, they could see the crocodile's outline, still circling the tree, patiently biding its time. As the rain continued to fall, the boys grew worried about a new danger, the rising water. The storm had brought heavy rain, and they couldn't see how high the river had risen. What if the water level crept up high enough for the crocodile to reach them? The thought made their blood run cold, but there was nothing they could do. All they could do was hold on, pray the water stayed low, and hope the night would pass without incident. But the hours dragged on, and the storm showed no sign of stopping. Sean and Ashley stayed huddled together in the tree, soaked to the bone, their minds racing with every possible outcome. Every time lightning illuminated the river, they saw the crocodile, always there, always waiting. It was a long, torturous night, one filled with the kind of fear that lingers deep inside you, clawing at your sanity. In the early hours of the morning, two terrified teens clung to the branches of a tree, their legs drawn up as tightly as possible. They were trapped in the depths of a mangrove forest, hiding from a relentless predator lurking just below. A massive saltwater crocodile had been stalking them through the night, swimming silently in the dark waters beneath their refuge. As they sat trembling, their legs aching from being curled up for so long, they held on to each other for dear life. The hours stretched on painfully, the darkness all around them making it impossible to see anything but the faint outline of each other. The croc, however, was never out of their minds. Periodically, they heard the subtle sound of water moving as the beast repositioned itself beneath the tree, still waiting, patient and unyielding. The creature's cold, calculating stare had been imprinted in their minds from earlier in the night, and it was clear that the crocodile wasn't giving up any time soon. They knew they couldn't stay awake forever, but sleep wasn't an option. If either of them nodded off and lost their grip on the tree, they would plummet into the crocodile-infested waters, where the outcome was certain death. Their hearts raced with every rustling branch, every distant splash. Each moment felt like a countdown to their potential demise. As dawn finally broke, they were filled with a mixture of relief and dread. The croc, still there, had remained by their side all night, its massive body lazily floating beneath the tree as if it were guarding them. The early morning light revealed something even more alarming. The water level had risen significantly from the rainfall during the night. The teens realized they were running out of time. One more storm could be enough to bring the water high enough for the crocodile to reach them. The teens were exhausted, both mentally and physically. Their limbs were stiff, their muscles sore, and their energy was fading fast. Hypothermia had started to set in during the cold, wet hours of the night, leaving them weakened and vulnerable. They knew they couldn't last much longer in this state. As high up as they were in the tree, there was nowhere else to go. They had no choice but to wait and hope for a miracle. With each passing minute, the risk of falling asleep and tumbling into the crocodile's clutches grew. At 10 a.m., a distant sound broke through the tension, a voice. For the first time in hours, they heard something other than the ominous sounds of the river. A police officer was calling out, searching for them in the dense mangrove forest. Their families, worried after not hearing from the boys for so long, had alerted authorities, prompting a search effort. As the officer's voice grew louder, hope stirred in their hearts. They screamed and waved frantically, trying to catch the officer's attention. Soon, the rescuers spotted the two teens clinging to the tree. The officer had been searching along the riverbank, following the signs left by the boys, and when they found their truck abandoned nearby, they knew they were close. Relief washed over the boys as they realized help had finally arrived. The first rescue attempt involved a helicopter. The plan was for the helicopter to hover above the tree and lower a ladder for the boys to climb up to safety. However, the moment the chopper drew near, the downdraft from the rotor blades created a dangerous situation. The teens, already weak and struggling to maintain their grip, were nearly blown out of the tree by the force of the air. Worse still, the crocodile remained below, its eyes fixated on the tree, as it had been all night. The swirling water beneath the helicopter made it clear that falling into the river meant certain death. The helicopter had to retreat, abandoning the air rescue for fear of causing more harm than good. But the noise and vibrations from the helicopter had an unexpected effect. The crocodile, finally frightened, swam away from the area. For the first time since the previous night, the boys had a reprieve from their predator. But they weren't out of danger yet. With the crocodile temporarily gone, the rescue team switched to Plan B. A boat was dispatched to the base of the tree, where it carefully maneuvered to avoid getting stuck in the shallow waters. As the boat approached, the teens prepared for their escape. They didn't wait long before they scrambled down from the tree and leapt into the boat, both boys managing to make it in without incident. The boat raced back to shore, where an ambulance was waiting to transport the two teens to the nearest hospital. After hours of enduring the terror of the night, they were finally safe. At the hospital, doctors examined the boys, finding that they were physically unharmed, but severely shaken. They were both suffering from the early stages of hypothermia and were severely traumatized by the experience. The ordeal of being hunted through the night by one of the most dangerous predators on Earth had left a deep emotional scar. The authorities launched an extensive search of the river, combing the area for any sign of Brett, their missing friend. Despite a thorough search, no trace of Brett or his belongings was ever found. The river's murky depths held on to its secrets, leaving the families and authorities without closure. The crocodile that had killed Brett and stalked the teens through the night also vanished, slipping back into the wild without leaving a single clue. For the two survivors, the memory of that night would never fade. They had faced death head-on, trapped in a deadly game of patience with one of nature's most efficient killers. They had lost a friend, and though they survived, they would carry the trauma of that harrowing night with them for the rest of their lives.